Hey everyone, how are you all doing on this Monday evening? Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am still trying to get a couple of things together, but we are here, we are here, we are here. Um, Thank you for joining me tonight. I am on YouTube and Facebook tonight. Instagram didn't want to really allow me to be great tonight. So we are here on Facebook and YouTube tonight. And I want to thank you for joining Breaking the Mold Grief Recovery. Thank you for joining me tonight. This is our second episode of season one, and I do not take this lightly for you taking your time out tonight to join me tonight. I am so thankful for that. I'm gonna see if I see comments tonight. Let me see. Make sure that I have my comments on. Yes, I do. Let me see. Make sure. Make sure I have my comments on so I can see your comments because I could not see your comments the last time and I apologize. But I'm sorry, I just jumped right in. Let me tell you a little bit about who I am. If this is your first time joining Grief Recovery, Breaking the Mold with Grief Recovery, thank you for taking the time out to join tonight. Thank you for watching the replay. Thank you for watching the replay. If you're watching the replay, please tag, share, and like. Let's get this broadcast out to everyone because we all deal with grief. And I pray that tonight's topic that you will see how all of us have been touched by grief. But once again, who I am Coach Charlene Smith. I am the CEO and founder of Breaking the Mold LLC. This is a podcast along with my coaching program, Breaking the Mold Grief Recovery, going from grief to grace to glory. So I am thankful, thankful, thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am a minister, a licensed ordained minister. I am a mother, a grandmother, an author. Let me tell you, I'm an author. I am an entrepreneur. I am so many different things, but most of all, I am the daughter of the Most High. So I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. And we're going to get right back into it. Last time, we do this every other Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Tonight, we are not on Instagram, but I will be posting this up to Instagram for those viewers that want to watch it on Instagram. But normally we're here every other Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I want to welcome you all tonight. We're going to get into some topics. But first, let me go through some administrative things. If you are looking to be a part of a guest on the podcast, you can do so by emailing me. Let me see where my banner at. There it is. You can email me at breaking the mold LLC for breaking the mold LLC digit one at gmail.com, or you can email me. Go on to my link tree and forward slash Charlene M. Smith. You will see a tab on my link tree. It says podcast guest, and you can go on there and fill out the form and you can become a guest. We can have some dialogue, conversations, but I am looking for guests. I am looking for guests for the show, but we are not going to belabor the time. This is an hour show. The first time, I only did for maybe a little bit over 30 minutes, but tonight we got some heavy hitters. We got some things that we have to get through tonight. So I am not going to belabor the time. I pray that I can see comments tonight. If not, how about this? We got another device. I'm going to go on my other device and get this together because I want to interact with you all. And y'all, it's hot up here. It is so hot. But let me do this. This is going to be public. Okay, change. Yes. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, Dakota. Welcome, Khadijah, Patricia. Yes, I see your comments. I'm so thankful that I can see your comments now. But let me dab a little bit here because I am hot because this topic is about to be hot. But we're going to be dealing with the different types of grief tonight. Do you know that there is 16 different types of grief and we've all been touched by grief? I had a conversation earlier with some people concerning grief and concerning the different things that comes along with grief. And let me tell you, it's we've all been touched by it. We've all been touched by it. But let me get into it. A lot of us, grief is just not dealing with it's just not dealing with let me get onto here. Let me see if I can do this because this is not going to let me be great. This is not going to let me be great. And let me see if I can do it this way. Grief. We're gonna get on Instagram because I have a lot of people over there DMing me asking me to get on here. Grief recovery. We're gonna be dealing with types of grief. Okay, done. Let's go here. Done. And we're going to go. Let me see if I can sit this right. We're going to go. Y'all just bear with me. Bear with me, please. Bear with me. I'm trying to get this together. I should have had it together, but you know, technology want to be technology. But we're gonna do it this way. Yeah, we're gonna do it this way. So I appreciate you all's patience with this, but we're gonna do it this way. For some reason, it will not let me go live on Instagram. Ain't that something? Y'all, technology is off the chain. But we're going to keep moving forward. We're going to let it go ahead and try to reconnect. But let me tell you, there is 16 different types of grief. We've all touched, been touched by grief in some form of fashion. We've Hey y'all on Instagram. It took me forever to get over here. I had to go around different ways to get onto Instagram because it did not want to let me be great. So I want to welcome you all on Instagram. This is tonight is going to be amazing. You're going to learn some things. We're going to learn some things together. So I appreciate you all coming on tonight. Dakota, my brother, if you could let me know how the sound is on that side, that will be great. On Instagram, if you can help me out a little bit, that would be so much greater. That would be so great to do. But yeah, y'all, I'm telling y'all, I don't know. Whew, it's hot. I am in Atlanta, Georgia, so it's hot. It is hot here. But we're gonna get into the topics of grief. And like I stated, grief does not have to always deal with loss. If you watched the last broadcast back on April 1st, which was our launch date, y'all. Um, we actually you learned about a couple of different types of grief. We talked a little bit about ambiguous grief, collective grief, where we all dealt with it during the pandemic, where it was where we all had to change our way of living. We were, not doing the normal thing, if you will. We're not living the normal lives the way we wanted to. We had to shut it down immediately on March 16th. But let me get into this topic right quick. Like I stated, there are 16 different types of grief. And when I started doing my research on this, it boggled my mind. It boggled my mind on how this was it was so many different types of grief. God just had me, dwelling into it, just trying to make sure that, I'm a researcher by nature. This is the way he made me. And so I have no qualms about going to research things. But we researched on this thing. And let me tell you, I was trying to understand. But let me tell you, grief is very common. But yet, y'all, is largely misunderstood. Um, Even though it's an aspect part of life, it's very misunderstanding to really try to understand grief. At one time or another, we all must go through a grieving process. But like I stated, there are many forms and types of grief, and understanding the differences can be a key. It can be a key to being able to move through the grief process in a healthy way. Do you not understand that there is a healthy way of grieving? And so we're going to go through some of these. We're going to, deal with some of these different types of topics tonight. We're going to see how far we can get through tonight. But I want to thank you all for joining again on Instagram. I was trying to get you over here onto my OneStream app, but it did not want to let me be great tonight. So I thank you. But getting back to this, acknowledging your grief is often the healthiest way you can come out on the other side of grief. What my motto is from grief to grace to glory. That's my motto. But also we have an unhealthy way where we're not dealing with grief. It can be a long-term, lasting negative impact on our lives. And we as we delve into this topic, you will see how it affects us even emotionally, mentally, and physically. It can and spiritually. It can affect us in so many different capacities. But the first topic of grief that we want to talk about tonight is normal grief. Is normal grief. Um, Normal grief, and it's a weird topic to have. I mean, a weird title for normal grief. But grief to me personally is not normal. But for the sake of understanding the different types of grief, we're going to give it the name normal grief. Um, Grief in itself, grief unfortunately is very normal because we deal with grief in all aspects of our life, whether it's financially, whether it's actually losing someone, whether it's losing a job, whether it's you got a different type of diagnosis, that now you got to change your way of life as to what you thought your life was going to be. We're going to get all into that, but grief is very normal and it does touch in everyone's life in some form or capacity. um, Also dealing with grief is a huge normal grief. We're still in normal grief. There's a huge range of emotions. There's a lot of emotions that we deal with. And some of those emotions are, you'll hear people say, oh, there's the 5 stages of grief. Well, in my studies, I found that they've broken it down even more. Um, they've broken it down even more as, you know, to 7 stages, but we're only going to deal with some of them. But some of the physical reactions from grief is the actual tightness of your chest. I don't know if you ever gotten some news and your chest just started getting real tight, feeling weak, lack of energy, nausea. You get, your heart start pounding real hard. Those are called like heart palpitations or, flutters and all of that goodness. Dealing with your heart, restlessness, um, being very tearful. It is so much, it's a plethora more. And there's no one way or one way that we will grieve. Some of the behavior reactions, and I've dealt with some of this, is confusion and forgetfulness. I don't know about you, but I lost, thank you, Dakota. When my son transitioned back in August of 2022, I noticed that I had to start writing down things that, because I was going to forget. It would completely, go away from my mind. And it's just something, the way our brain tries to protect us in some form of capacity when we're dealing with some type of trauma, some type of, different aspects that we don't want to face. That's the best way I could describe it. That we can become forgetful. You deal with the confusion. You could become absent-minded. Some people even dream of the person they lost. I know it took me a year to really dream about my son. But that's not my area, so I'm not going to go into dreams. But I dreamed about him. But also some of the emotional reactions that we get to grief, and this is where you go into the 5 stages. But like I said, it's more stages than just the 5, so we're not going to go through all of them. But some of them is the anger, anger, shock, denial, numbness, loneliness, and sometimes, this surprised me when I saw this in my research. Um, it was relief. So it's dependent upon what it is, whether it's a loss of a job, different things like that. It could be a relief. Um, I've heard some people even say when they're dealing with uh, someone that has terminal illness, sometimes it's a relief for them. I'm not saying that's what mine would be or yours, but I've heard that. You have apathy, irritability, misplaced anger. Then some of the social reactions to grief is you being unusually dependent on others. Whereas I know I had an issue where I was withdrawing from others. I was withdrawing from people. I was having difficulty in relationships and not being very communicative. I avoided people. Some people avoid people. Um, then also avoiding colleagues. I did that because I have the pleasure of working from home. I've done that, avoided colleagues and didn't want to talk, just told them, hey, you're going to just email me. Just email me. That's all I want you to do. Don't call me. I don't want to talk. Nothing of that sort. Um, then also, let me try to, because something's going on with Instagram and it's not allowing me to really be here doing this, but it's okay. um you have misplaced anger, so we want to grieve healthy, and in some of these things we will go through as the season go on. We will delve into each thing, individually. And if you have dealt with some of this, I want to hear from you. I want to make sure that your voice gets out there, how you dealt with some of these emotional um you know emotional repercussions from dealing with grief. I know some people, they increase substance abuse, whether with smoking, drinking, different things like that. So this is all a part of normal grief. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to stay in the pits. We don't want to stay in that space. It's not healthy in the long term. Another type of grief is anticipatory grief. I don't know. Have you ever heard of anticipatory grief? Have you ever heard of this? I had never heard of it. I know now what it is, and then now I can understand what it is, but I had never heard of it. But anticipatory grief or can be common if you're expecting a loss. One of the a couple of the examples is that you're having a pending divorce. You're expecting, now you're no longer going to be a wife or a husband, because now you're divorcing. um, or they're dealing with a terminal illness, and unfortunately they may not, have any type of cure to it, or they're not they've ran the course of treatment and it haven't happened. You're still here, but now you're starting the grieving process early. Another part of dealing with anticipatory grief, or rather that can be an example, is a pending loss of a job, where you're hearing the rumors of layoffs and all this stuff, and you're like, what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. um I don't know how I'm going to take care of my family. Now you're in a grievous state. That is called anticipatory grief. And I know I've dealt with that in my life. So I'm pretty sure some of you all have dealt with this in your life, where you're anticipating a breakup. You're anticipating losing a job. You're anticipating that family member or friend that has been diagnosed, unfortunately, with terminal illness. So now you're starting the grieving process early. So you're starting the anxiousness, the different emotions, the anger, all of these different emotions, and you're probably not talking to a lot of people. You're probably avoiding the conversation. You don't want to talk to it. All of that, talk about it, all of that stuff, dealing with anticipatory grief. Um, and you try to anticipate what is what may happen once that relationship ends, what may happen once that job ends, what may happen once that family member or friend that may have terminal illness, when they transition over into glory. You may, you're starting to anticipate how you're going to mourn or grieve them. um, but some people, they have and this is in my research, I'm looking at this, and it says some people feel like they were able to take the time they needed to say goodbye to that loved one, or to that relationship, or even to that job. I'm just giving those three examples because I know that a lot of us have dealt with that, one of the three. I think it's more easier for you all to connect and understand and get the understanding of anticipatory grief. You have that space of saying, you have that time to say, you tell that person all what you wanted to say. That's on their transition bed. I don't like to say the D word. That's so you'll always hear me say transition, but because they're transitioning from one body to another. That's just my belief. But you can have some of the tough conversations of forgiveness and really, close out that chapter in your life. So that's part of anticipatory grief. So I know that a lot of us have dealt with that. I know that a lot of us have dealt with that. And I pray that, you got the closure that you needed. I pray that you got the peace that you needed during the anticipatory grief process. Another type of grief is called complicated grief. Now, complicated grief occurs when you're grieving in the process, and the process doesn't not move all the way through the steps of grief. So it can be prolonged. It's much more intense. So it depends upon the situation of what you're grieving. I'm going to say for me, I dealt with complicated grief due to the fact that I lost my firstborn after 31 years of life suddenly. And that it took me a minute to move through the grief process. And there's no systematic order to the grief process, but a lot of times you're going to hit most of them. But it took me a while. And a part of doing this podcast is me moving through my grief process. This is a part of my healing, is to touch those that are dealing with grief and they're still stuck in the pause of transition. So this is why I do what I do. This is why, I'm coming on every other Monday speaking on grief, because what I don't want you to do is stay paused in the transition. I don't want you to stay in the pit. I want you to move forward by honoring those that have transitioned, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally. I want you to be able to live your life out loud and honor those that have transitioned. I don't want you to stay in the pit. But another thing with dealing with complicated grief, it very so much has a very significant impact on your ability to function. I mean, I could barely function when my son passed away. I think I was running on survival mode versus thriving. Um, and then, this is where I would recommend a mental health professional or a coach like myself to help you move through those stages of that complicated grief, because we do not want to stay stuck in there, because you have a lot of life to live. That's turn that pain into purpose. We don't want to waste the pain. So we don't want to stay, in that complicated type of grief. And it's one of the most difficult types of grief. So it's I'm doing an extensive study on complicated grief, because that type of grief would not resolve on its own. And can I be very transparent? I have been going through therapy since my son transitioned. There's been other things that have happened in my life during the time of me going through this grieving process that almost sent me over the edge. And this is why I am so passionate about being there for those that are stuck in transition, that are stuck in that pause, that's stuck in that pit, because I don't want you to get to that place, that sinking place, the trenches of despair, the trenches of not having any hope. Because the word tells us that we do not grieve as those of the world, but we grieve with hope. because we're going to see our loved ones on the other side. We're going to see Jesus on the other side. But let me get off my soapbox because I could go on and on and on. But that's what complicated grief. Chronic grief results in extreme, intense reactions to loss, do not subside. These emotions will last for a very, very long time, cause you to have incredible distress that continues to intensify. You had difficulty making much, if any, progress in moving forward through your grief so you can heal. That I in my heart of heart, complicated grief and chronic grief they walk hand in hand. Because if you look at, if you really pay attention to it, that complicated grief, you're not going through you don't move all the way through the process of the steps of grief. You prolong it, you know, prolong it. But then with chronic grief, the the grief is extreme, intense reactions. So I think they go hand in hand. That's just my opinion. That's the way it's looking. But that's how that goes. I'm. Oh my goodness, this is so good. I don't know if you're getting anything out of this, but I pray that you are. I pray that you're learning something, because this is just not for the griever. This is for those that are supporting the grievers, because you want to understand and see some of the things that they are doing or not doing, going through. If they haven't went through all of the stages, you as the supporter, you can assist those to move along through their grief process, because they have so much life to live. They need to turn their pain into purpose, their wounds into a witness, and their test into a testimony. We're not going to stay in the spirit of grief. We're not going to stay in the pit and pause and transition. We're going to go from grief to grace to glory. That's what this is about. That's what this is about. This is why I'm coming on every other week to help you, to help myself to move through this process of grief. Because God said he wants to give us life and life more abundantly. And grief is not going to stagnate us. Grief is not going to paralyze us. Grief is not going to just lock us and bound us into the pit of pause. Grief is not going to do that. So this is why I come live every other week to talk about grief. But we're going to go a little bit further, because we got some things to get through tonight. So we went through normal grief. We went through complicated grief. We went through chronic grief. We went through anticipatory grief. That's just 4. Can you find yourself in one of those? Can you find yourself in one of those? Can you find yourself in one of, even just a 4? Even just a 4. So far, can you find yourself in one of those? Can you find yourself? I know someone that's watching. I know someone that's listening have either been in one of those 4 or know someone that's still in one of those 4. So this word is for you. This podcast is for you, because we're going to get through this together. So we're going to go on to the next type of grief. Remember, at the top of the hour, I stated that there were 16 different types of grief, and we're just now getting to number 5. This is why grief is so misunderstood. It's so complicated, because you have to pick this thing apart. You got to pick it apart, and we're going to pick it apart, because we're not going to stay in pause. But number 5 is delayed grief. Delayed grief. And delayed grief can happen if you're experiencing incredibly stark feelings of sorrow and longing, even if the loved one's death occurred a very long time ago. I know people that have lost loved ones, that have lost loved ones 10, 15 years ago, and they're still stuck right there at the point of transition. That's delayed grief. That is delayed grief. They're still stuck. It can be felt as, for years after a loss. And it essentially means that your emotional reaction didn't happen when it should have. This might be due to you disassociated yourself because you don't want to face the pain. You tried to do mind blocks. You tried to cover it up with substance abuse. You tried to cover it up, hey, going out there sleeping with others. You tried to go out there just staying busy but not productive. You try to cover it up and not face it head on and deal with it. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and face that loss. We want to face that loss. Whether, like I said, it's a loss of a relationship, loss of a job, loss of, a physical being in your life, a loved one in your life. We have to face it. We can't run away from pain. Pain is still going to be there. Have you ever taken medicine? You have a headache and you taking medicine, and it gets rid of the headache, but then the headache comes back because you really haven't dealt with the actual cause of the headache. You just dealt with the symptom of the headache. That's what we're dealing with grief. You can't hide it under alcohol. You can't hide it under under sleeping with others. You can't hide it, by avoiding it. You have to face it. You have to face it. In order to heal, you have to face it. That's the delayed grief. Then this one was very interesting. This one was very interesting. It's called distorted grief. And with this one, um, it's almost like chronic grief and complicated grief because it deals with intense and extreme reaction to a loss. Um, but also, this one has a very noticeable change in your behavior, your overall. You have a severe self-destructive behavior, especially dealing with anger, lashing out towards yourself and others, or that is one of the biggest symptoms of distorted anger, is dealing with, distorted grief. I'm sorry, is dealing with that anger part. A lot of people I know that have dealt with grief, they stay in that anger part a long time, especially depending upon how your loved one transition, um, how your loved one transition, excuse me, because like there's many different ways for a loved one to transition, and you have some that commit suicide. You may be angry with that person. You have some that have been murdered. You're not forgiving that person that murdered your child, or your loved one. um, or you I've seen where people have been angry with those that did not tell them that they were suffering with a terminal illness, because in that person's mind they didn't want to be a burden to those. you know um that's distorted grief. They're angry, and we don't want you can't stay stuck in one stage. You cannot stay stuck in one stage. um that is a very emotional symptom of distorted grief, is lashing out. I find a lot of people lash out. That's why in one of the episodes coming up, we're going to be dealing with the grieving responsibly. And a lot of people don't talk about that. A lot of people talk about supporting the grievers, but we as grievers, we have to grieve responsibly in a healthy way. Because what we don't want to do is push those that are supporting us away. We don't want to displace our emotions onto them, and it's not them, but they just happen to be the closest ones to us at this moment. So we're going to be dealing with that in later episodes. Um, but we're, I'm telling you, this is very near and dear to me. The next one, I made mention of this at the top of the broadcast, is that it's called cumulative grief. And this happened when you experience a second loss. No, this is not the one, but cumulative grief. This is when you happen to experience a second loss shortly after, or while you're still processing in your grief, your grief journey from the first loss. And can I be very, very transparent with you all? This is something that happened to me in the process of dealing with my son's transition. Um, Let me give you a short little synopsis of what happened in 2022. Earlier 2022 in April, I lost a first cousin due to a debilitating disease. Then that July, I lost my oldest aunt. Then that was at July. Yeah, July. Then the first week of August, we found out that a cousin of ours out in on the West Coast, because I'm on the East Coast, out on the West Coast, was found unresponsive, and unfortunately, he did not make it. Then, all in the midst of that, this is when my son come up missing, and I'm trying to locate him. So if you have not heard my story, go back and watch the first episode on my page. I'm on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. So go back and you will see the story. But just for the sake of this, when I was going through and I was trying to locate my son because he was missing in action, I got a phone call the day before we found my son that a cousin of mine had also transitioned due to a vehicle accident. Then the very next day, I get a call about my son being declared at 11:05 a.m. That is a lot of cumulative grief because you haven't gotten over the one from the beginning of the year. Then you have one in the middle of the year, July. Then you have three of them back to back to back, all within a week. A lot of us dealt with this in the pandemic. I had to stop watching the news because you know, the um, the news was doing the toe count and all of that stuff. I was like, oh no, we're not dealing with that. We're not. I can't do that. I can't feed my soul with that. I can't feed my spirit with that. So we were dealing with cumulative grief. You have people that were losing family members back to back, back to back, back to back. And then on top of that, during the pandemic, we couldn't even go to the funerals. We had to watch a funeral live stream. So now we can't be amongst those to console those that are hurting. We can't even do that. Those were some grievous moments that we all experienced. This is why I said we've been touched. All of us have been touched by some form of grief. And all of it is not considered with loss of a person physically, but we have dealt with some grievous, grievous situations. Then you have exaggerated grief. Let me tell you, exaggerated grief, this includes more intense types of reactions. It's like everything is like very intense. Um, this is when you see what you see when you in any other type of grief, when it's exaggerated, your emotions, your actions may become more noticeable, disruptive. You might this is also, y'all seeing like a pattern here. You might experience destructive behaviors, nightmares, thoughts of suicide and self harm, drug or other substance abuse, and even abnormal fears. Um, Sometimes exaggerated grief can result in the development of a psychiatric disorder. I'm not going to touch that. I'm not licensed a clinician in that area, but I wanted to give you this information because this was a part of my research. But I'm not an expert in that field, but I'm an expert in my experience and what I've dealt with and dealing with those others that I walk closely with, dealing with grief and what I've seen in my research. But exaggerated grief, um, I know that I've dealt with that as well in some parts of my journey. Um, Then you have secondary loss. That's a different type of grief. This can occur when a loss affects several areas of your life. Um, the end results can be that you actually experience a number of losses, which I just gave you an example of what we dealt with in 2022 in my family. Um, and then all stemming from this also can be stemming from original loss you experience. And this goes back to what I was saying prior, where with the secondary loss, say for instance, you have a spouse and that spouse transitioned on. Now, you know, that now you're missing that person's income. So now your way of life has changed. Your normal routines has changed. Um, your circle of friends have changed. Those are secondary losses. And a lot of people don't look at it as, you know, a grievous state. And that's what it is. That's what it is. A lot of us deal with secondary loss because think about it. If you lose a job and you're the only breadwinner, now you have the potential of losing your home or your apartment, you know, your housing. Now you're wondering how you're going to eat, how you're going to pay your car note if your car isn't paid off, how you're going to support yourself. These are all a part of the original grief, but we call it secondary loss. I don't know about you, but grief has touched every last one of us. Every last one of us. Every last one of us. This one, this next grief, this next type, this was very, very interesting because I see a lot of people. I don't know about you all, but I see when some people they lose someone, it seems as though they can move on quickly. Have y'all ever seen that where they can move on quickly? It seems like it doesn't bother them as in the intense way that it bothers you. Um, this is called masked grief, masked grief. Um, but if you pay attention, you could see it in their social behaviors. You could see it in their emotional behaviors. You could see some of the physical symptoms that we talked about earlier, whether it's lack of sleep, forgetfulness, absent-mindedness, whether it's nausea, you know, they have anxiety now, all of these different things, but they say they're good. That's a mass grief. That's a mass grief. And so those people, I watches them. I watches them very, very closely. When especially when that loved one is very, very close to them. I watch them very closely just to make sure that I'm not seeing some of those exhibited symptoms and they don't put two and two together. They don't correlate it together. But this next one, I learned this one from a pastor friend of mine, a sister of mine. Um, and she talked about this a couple of years ago on my spiritual moms talk show when they did a talk show on grief. And one of the aspects of grief that she spoke about was called ambiguous grief. And this made me go and really research this out. It made me go really research this out. And I know that a lot of us, especially if you're single, you dealt with some of this ambiguous grief. But for the sake of the conversation, we're going to talk about ambiguous grief. And another word for ambiguous grief is disenfranchised grief. And this is whenever you feel that your loss is invalidated by others. Um, this person, this pastor friend of mine, they were talking about how they lost their all their church members in one day and don't know why, you know. And I correlated that when us single folks, because I don't know about you, but I, you know, by me being single, I will, you know, talk to someone or thinking we're, you know, we're dating and we're doing, you know, going in the right direction, getting to know each other, and all of a sudden they just ghost you, and that's a total, and you, so you don't get an explanation. And you know, and you start really caring about that person, and you start really, you know, may possibly seeing a future with that person or anything like that, but they leave you with no explanation. And so now you're going through a grievous situation, and you go through some of the same stages of grief. You go through anger, you go through, you know, denial, you go through like betrayal, you go through, you start blaming yourself, like what did I do to you know, warrant this type of treatment, you know, different things like that. A lot of people don't recognize that. That's why they tell you to heal before moving on to someone else, because you're going to go, I'm not saying you're going to go through all of the five stages, set 5 to 7 stages of grief, but you're going to go through something, especially if it was a lot of emotions involved in that relationship. um you know, hmm, mm, mm, mm. Then you have some that you know, I've had people where they didn't validate, you know, a loss of a relationship with friends. um and you've been friends for, you know, umpteen years, and all of a sudden, you know, y'all have grown on different paths, but at the same time, you're like, but they were always there, you know. So you grieve their friendship, you grieve all of that, and so the person doesn't have to be deceased, or they do not have to be, you know, they didn't have to be transitioned or anything like that, like a physical loss, but it's that they're no longer in your life. And I do believe that a lot of us have dealt with something like that, that we, you know, we don't have any explanation. We don't have, you know, even if we do have an explanation, because we can even correlate this with a divorce. You know, when you're divorced, I've been divorced. You go through certain parts of the stages of grief. You know, you go through. Sometimes you go through the loneliness. Sometimes you go through the woulda, coulda, shouldas. You know, you go through the anger, depending upon was the divorce amicable or not. You know, so it's a lot that, you know, a lot of grievous situations that you go through that don't have to correlate with a actual physical loss. This is why this is so dear and near to me, because I've been through a lot of this, and just as you have, but nobody's talking about it. You know, I've been very transparent with my grief process, um, because a lot of times we want to hide, you know, in the house. We want to hide away from everyone. But no, you need to see what my grief looked like because guess what? If I'm transparent, you would sit up there. You know, I've had people come and tell me, hey, you know, I'm glad that you were vulnerable. I'm glad that you were transparent because you stepped out and you showed me what it looks like, that I'm not crazy, that I'm not crazy, that I'm not the only one going through this, because grief will put you in a point of, if you allow it, it will put you in a point of solitude. And we're not going into solitude. That's where the enemy wants you at, in solitude. So he can wreak havoc with your emotions, your mind, and just play around with you. And you be like, oh, don't nobody care, ain't nobody calling me, all of this other stuff. No, we're not getting down with that. That's not what breaking the mold is. We're gonna break that spirit of grief off of you. Another another, you know, type of grief is traumatic grief. Now, I want to make a pause right there. Um, just know that you do not have to have one type of grief. You could be dealing with a culmination of all of these at some point of at some point in your journey of grief. You can be dealing with some of this, multiple different types of grief. So don't think that you're just dealing with normal grief. You're just dealing with cumulative grief. You're just dealing with, anticipatory grief. You could be dealing with variety of different types of grief at one time. Just know that. But traumatic grief, that's a common result of trying to process grief when there's added trauma that comes from a horrifying or unexpected loss or violent death. This goes back to what I was saying on the manner of the person's transition, how they transition. Um, that is called a traumatic. Mine was considered as a traumatic because it was something that was sudden. It was not planned. My son was not sick. He transitioned due from his injuries from a car accident, and then to deal with the legal ramifications behind that, that even topple onto your grieving process. So I implore you to be very aware of where you are in your grieving process. And if you don't know, you can hit that link tree, and actually you can actually hit my email. Go to my email, and let me just put my email up here and email me. And I have a coaching program starting in May, mid-May, where it's an 8-week course. We're going to walk together through this process from right now to where you want to be in your grief process, where you want to be from this point forward. Because what we're not going to do is stay in the spirit of grief. What we're not going to do is stay in pause and transition. We want to go from grief to grace to glory. You're not going to stay there. And if you allow me to be your coach, then we're going to walk this thing together. We're going to walk this thing together. So email me so you could be on the first email blast that goes out before I open it up to the public, because it's going to be a small, intimate group. It's not going to be a large group, so it's going to be very limited space, because guess what? This is a very sensitive subject. This is a very sensitive subject. So I want to give my attention to those that truly want to be a part of this next cohort coming up in mid-May. So just go ahead and email me your information. I'll get you into our database, and you will be the first one on the list with the first offer that comes up in mid-May. So that was my commercial break. But if you want to be a part of Breaking the Mold, you want to be a guest on Breaking the Mold podcast, hit this link tree down right there in front of you. There is a tab on there that says podcast guest. You don't have to have lost anyone. If you want to deal with some of the different types of grief that I spoke about, then by all means, deal with it. Let's talk about it. Let's have conversation, because you never know whether or not someone is listening to you, waiting for you, want to see what, hear your voice, because you never know what your story can do for someone else. You never know what your story could do for someone else. But oh my goodness, I would love for you to be a guest. But if I got to be up here all by myself, guess what? I'm going to still do it. I'm still going to plow this journey right on through. I'm going to plow this journey right on through. But also, before we're not going to go get through all of them tonight. When I come back at the end of the month, we can finish those off. But we're going to have a new topic. And I would love to have a guest if need be. So go ahead and hit that link tree, hit on the podcast guest tab, and let's go ahead and get you set up to be on our next podcast. But let me tell you, for the month of May, I have something very, very special. That is Mother's Day month. That's Mother's Day month. But did you not know that they had an International Bereaved Mother's Day, which is the Sunday that precedes that National Mother's Day holiday? I would love to have maybe 2 or 3 moms on to talk about how they celebrate Mother's Day with the due to the due to the unfortunate circumstance of their children transitioning on. So please, by all means, hit that link tree if you would like to be a part of that show. It's going to be on a Sunday preceding Mother's Day. There's going to be a special show, and I want to give this towards those moms that are dealing with the loss of their children, the transition rather of their children. That for Mother's Day, I want to celebrate you because guess what? You're still a mom. You're still a mom. So I want to definitely celebrate you. So make sure that you definitely reach out to me on Linktree to be a guest. If you want to be a part of my cohort, by all means, email me so that you can get onto our database for the first cohort that's starting in mid-May. You will have first dibs. You will have first dibs. It's going to be a short window. You better jump on it. Then I'm opening it up to the public. It's going to be very limited in space due to the nature of the subject matter, because I want to be able to give you all of my attention and focus on you as we walk this journey through. All right. I am so thankful that you all had joined me tonight. We did not get through all of the 16 different types of grief. I only got through, I think, maybe 11 of them. But I'm telling you, grief is very, it's not discriminatory. It has touched each and every last one of us in some form or capacity. Um, Grief is a part of life, but what we don't want to do is we don't want to stay in pause. We don't want to stay in the pits. We don't want to stay in pause and transition. We want to turn your pain into a purpose, because we don't want to waste your pain. That's one of, if you see my hashtag, I'm not going to waste my pain, because my mandate on me, God has given me a mandate to comfort those that are stuck in the pit, that's stuck in the pause and transition, because we want to turn your pain into purpose. We want to turn your wounds into a witness, and we want to turn this test into a testimony, because we're going from grief to grace to glory. And I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. I would a whole hour, y'all. I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. Please share out the broadcast. Tag those that you think will be beneficial to hear what was said tonight. Make sure that you tune in on, I think our next one is April 29th. At the end of the month, I want to have a guest. So please, by all means, if you want to be a guest, hit that link tree. Go ahead and give me put the podcast tab that's on there. Become a guest, and let's go ahead and get this going, because I want to have conversation. I love talking, but I want to have conversation, and I love those that have come into the comments, that have shared out the broadcast, that have even shared some of their experiences. I want to thank you for joining me tonight, and we will be back here on April 29th with episode 3. We're still in season 1 with Grief Recovery, presented by Breaking the Mode LLC, and we will see you then at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Preferably, I have a guest. If not, we're going to keep plowing. Y'all have an awesome night, and thank you for joining me. Peace and blessings.